Hello, and it's welcome to episode 22 of We Love Ugly Data, the Deep Analysis podcast. You're joining myself here. Alan's here. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
And Dan's here again. Hi, Dan. If you don't speak, we can't see on the camera, Dan. Yeah, and the reason why all three of us are here again is that, like last month, which was a special, we talked about the awards. This month is a special, we're talking about the predictions. So the format for the podcast, and obviously, those of you who've been here before, we have to talk about the format. And the format for this week is three predictions, 30 minutes. We'll just a link back to last year's and then talk about this year's ones again. But there's a few little bits of housekeeping we need to do before we start. We put out a predictions paper each year, a report each year, which you can download from the website. Last year was 2024's predictions, therefore happened in 2023. This year's are the 2025 predictions, which come out in 2024, which is apparently screwing with my mind that I'm having to work this out. If you want to get these, there will be links in the show notes to all this stuff as ever. You go to our website, write some, you fill in some information, and you can download the whole thing for free. There are 11 predictions because one louder than 10 for Spinal Tap fans out there. Yes, we're doing that again, apparently. And yes, there is one on blockchain. For those of you who like to have a blockchain, there is a blockchain one. So that's just for you, blockchain fans. But first up is Alan. Alan, we're going to talk about your quick review of your 2024 prediction. See how that one's gone this year, in your opinion, from your travels, and then into your 2025. So in 2024, you were expecting knowledge graphs and data meshes to gain traction. How's that been for you?
Oh, I think it's absolutely. They don't get the headlines, right? But at the end of the day, you know, which rolls into the actual next year's prediction. If you're going to be building out, you know, AI-driven automation or whatever, agents or hyper automation, whatever terminology you want to use, you got to have your data right. And it's one thing saying, oh, the HR data's here, but what's the connection between those files? What's the connection between these pieces of data? So knowledge graphs is that ability to sort of build out those connections and relationships, and data meshes, if you like, at another level. What's the relationship? How do we manage all of these things in one place, etc.? All your different data stores. So, I mean, it's played out pretty accurately. It's not going to get the headlines. I mean, this is back office, you know, developer, data scientist stuff, but at the end of the day, this is one of those key components, or these are two of these key components. Without them, it's just not going to happen. But I think what's happened in 2024, which leads rather neatly and coincidentally into 2025's prediction, is unstructured data and structured data sort of, you know, find themselves in the same world for the first time.
So having data is important. Knowing where that data is and connecting to it is even more important. And for 2025, unstructured data, super important. So the prediction for 2025 that you're talking to us about is this one. For those of you who can't see the screen, structured data people will stop treating unstructured data like something that got stuck in their shoes.
Yeah,
what does that mean?
Well, it's played out throughout my career, and it goes back before my career started. But the world of unstructured data and the world of structured data, I mean, just are worlds apart. And you and I, Matt, when we were at 451, I mean, you know, it's like the structured data people spoke Mandarin and we spoke, you know, Korean or something. I mean, it's always been that way. But the start of this year was pivotal for me, actually, and probably, which comes to this prediction, was in January. I was in the Bay Area for a week meeting with clients. I met with IDP, new IDP vendor, Salesforce. Who'd have thunk it? Salesforce, unstructured data, IDP. I mean, I didn't see that coming, right? And it's not really about how well they do it. That's just one of those little flags that's going up. You know, Databricks, Snowflake, they're talking about unstructured data. ServiceNow, Workday have made recent acquisitions. So it's sort of indicative of our entire industry, really, that all these separate little independent worlds are all now coming under the same sort of gaze, and people are trying to figure out how do they fit together. I mean, IDP and automation, or workflows, we would call it, document management.
So why is this happening? I mean, I've got my opinions about why this is happening. Previously, I think probably intimated from the way in which we phrased the prediction, we felt in our unstructured world a little bit put upon, like our data is ugly, hence the name of the podcast, but also kind of, if we can avoid touching that horrible stuff, we're going to avoid touching that horrible stuff. Now, you can't avoid touching that horrible stuff. So why can't you avoid it? What's driving it?
Well, you can avoid it still to some extent, and people are doing their very best to do so. But I think the reality is, I mean, it's sort of, this is just cliche, but there is a degree. I mean, structured data, that the name explains it, right? There is actually a structure there in tables and rows in databases, or how, at the most fundamental level, you can actually understand the structure. With unstructured data, we've always had the systems to provide that, right? Which was the birth of document management. These files go in this folders. This is the name of this. This is version control, etc. But very few people have actually done it that way. They've just used these things as dumping grounds for files. So structured data people are realizing that there's severe limitations to what they can do with structured data, right? ChatGPT, OpenAI, Textract, blah, 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 all of these things that allow us to pull and understand what's in a file and do something with it. They're obviously in the spotlight. But for this to work in the enterprise, that's a whole different thing, right? Anybody can go into ChatGPT and ask it to write a whatever for them, an essay for their college or whatever. But when you're in the enterprise, this is a wake-up call for a lot of big companies, right? That has always relied on just structured data.
So how's this going to manifest itself? I mean, I'm on your side. I'm from a similar place to you. But for those of you who are listening or watching right now, how's it going to manifest itself during the year? What would you expect? What would you expect people to better hear or see, which suggests this change is going to be happening?
I think first of all, more M&A, right? For sure. I mean, essentially, there's a lot of unstructured data software companies out there who A, have the software that can do this, and B, have customer data, right? So essentially sitting on these gold mines of customer data, and it's far cheaper. When you're talking about the Oracles, the Salesforces, the Workdays, the ServiceNows, the IBMs, the SAPs of this world, these are bargain acquisitions in comparison to what they're often undertaking. So a lot of M&A, I think a lot in the search world.
That's what I was going to come to, because there's been a real big uptick in what we would consider almost like classical enterprise search use cases, maybe not being called enterprise search, but use case wise, stuff that would be very familiar to us from the early parts of this century as of being appearing in our purview, which has been a lovely blast in the past and made us all feel much younger than we are. But that's also been driven by this, you think?
Yeah, I mean, search. I mean, so the big promise of enterprise search was what we used to call federated search, right? I never saw one successful project, and I saw quite a few back in the day, because it would hit all of the issues you'd expect it to hit. It doesn't, you don't have permission to see this data, or okay, now I pull something from here and I pull something from there. They don't match with one another.
Thinking back to your data fabric kind of environment, that in theory provides you with the using the word du jour, guardrails to prevent against that kind of thing, right? So it should be easier, not easy, but easier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, if you take somebody like Cinequa, who we recently acquired, let's be honest, enterprise software companies have struggled to sell their products, right? Because Microsoft bundles in some kind of search for free, Google search for free. But this sort of heavy lifting, I mean, they were some of the first who were exploring RAG and large language models. I mean, technically, the better enterprise search engines are incredibly advanced. They struggle to get customers, right? But you take that and you stick that inside a massive set of business applications, and you bundle it for free, essentially, or it's just part of the package. Then people are going to use it. Its challenge was always that it was a third-party product.
Yeah, Dan, do you want to come in on this? Because obviously, like us, you're very much in the unstructured data world and have kind of been for a long time, or rather, the world of trying to make structure out of unstructured data. To be more specific, how do you see this one playing out? Do you agree with Alan, or is this a vain hope that we kind of think is going to happen every year, and we hope is the case?
No, I agree with Alan. We've been covering for 2 years now software companies that sit between the unstructured data stores and data scientists.
Mm-hmm.
These are companies that specialize in doing exactly what we're talking about here, and simply because of large language models being the rage, and I don't see any slowdown in that. In fact, I think we're going to see more activity over the next few years. And
Mm-hmm.
if you train a LLM or a small language model, as Alan said earlier, you have to have unstructured data, the files that make up, for example, if you're a product company, what are the files that have the knowledge for that product
Mm-hmm.
to support that customer service app you're going to build on top of your small language model. So I see it only going up. And also, I think we're starting to get to the point where the people that, and I love this headline, something stuck on their shoe, right? I felt like that for 30 years, guys, working on the unstructured side of the fence.
Yeah, I bet.
When big data came out, right? The whole big data revolution ignored unstructured data. So 10 years ago, we couldn't get in onto a panel anywhere to speak at any big data. Here we are 10 years later, and I imagine we would get invited to some panels.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's, well, one, it's nice to be invited to panels, and two, it's also nice to be sit there with your arms folded going, I have finally been vindicated. So talking about, Dan, while I've got you, and talking about vindication, let's just go onto your 2024 review point, and then we can talk about your 2025 prediction. So first of all, your 2024 prediction, which was a clever one, because it was undoubtedly always going to be true, and it would be impossible to prove even if it wasn't true. So let me just read that out for people who are listening rather than watching. So Dan's 2024 prediction was, for the first time in human history, machines will read and process more documents than knowledge workers do, which is, I would guess you're going to say, big double thumbs up, definitely happened, right, Dan?
Sure, I'll take the victory here because you've already given the disclaimer. Yeah, this was more of one of those inspirational or aspirational goals. And really, I think it was for us to point out that something had changed fundamentally in computing at the end of 2023. And that was that Gen AI started to show up on desktops all around the world, businesses all around the world. And one of the things that ChatGPT, Gemini, Llama, whatever your flavor is that you're using, is they're pretty good at reading text and then telling you what they just read. And they can extract the data. So for our listeners out there, IDP, Intelligent Document Processing, is no more and no less than a computer using artificial intelligence to read documents for humans. That's what it does. It does a little bit more than that, but fundamentally, that's the technology. And I think we got used to that over the years. Well, we got OCR, but this is different. Now, and we've covered this during the past year, there were several products that came out that were on the desktop in Windows and now on Apple phones and on Android phones. And they read documents and they tell you what's in the document. So I don't have any way to measure this. I just have a pretty good feeling that we crossed the Rubicon in 2024. And as a result, if you go to a worker today in an office and say, there's a stack of paper, I want you to read that, I want you to summarize it for me, that person's going to look at you probably and go, and I can use some AI tools, right? Because they're going to want to do it the old-fashioned way, Matt.
So let's go on to 2025 then. Having given you the victory lap for 2024, let's get you on the starters orders for 2025. So this year's prediction, I'm going to read out again for people who are listening rather than watching. To grow, intelligent document processing, IDP companies must cross the border. So is that Mexico? What's the crossing the border element here? Is it you know?
Some of our eagle-eyed readers caught that the image I put in my blog.
And the links to the blog will be in the show notes if people are going. What
that
blog?
was actually the Ambassador Bridge from Canada to the USA. I thought I'd better stay on that side of the American border so as not to get anybody upset or triggered out there, right? So yeah, so the border is just a metaphor. Intelligent document processing has for 30 years been you open documents, you read them with your software, you extract data, and then you pass some of that data on to the next business system. So that handoff point is, let's call that the border as a metaphor. The IDP software companies stayed in their country. They didn't cross the border with rare occasions. So some would occasionally launch what I call a cross-border raid into the business app database so that they could validate the data that they were working on and that they had just extracted. But for the most part, these software companies remained solidly on the side of the border that is all about reading documents. Now, there's a problem because in the last couple of years, this core IDP functionality has become increasingly commoditized by hyperscalers and also startups. So it's been squeezing the profits of these companies, and it forces them to find profitable growth somewhere else. So I think they're going to have to move up the value chain and add more functionality from the other side of the border. Example would be companies that are doing invoice processing, and they've started to add functionality that's really on the ERP side or the accounting system side, workflows and different automations that in the past we wouldn't see coming from an IDP vendor. So those lines are already starting to blur. We also see a lot of opportunity out there. I know all of us have talked about this, not just in accounts payable or accounts receivable, but we're seeing in logistics, in insurance, in government, and we could just go through a list of places where IDP companies have an opportunity now, especially because of the dreaded agentic AI. They can actually put together a fairly decent solution that says, we're going to extract the data, and then we have an agent here that's going to make a decision based on the data we extracted, and it's going to trigger a workflow elsewhere in the company. So this is a great opportunity, I think, and they're going to have to do it. The companies that don't go across the border, I think their growth is going to be limited as this becomes more of a commodity market.
So to look your idiom here and thinking a little bit, as Alan was talking about M&A earlier on, are these companies which are going to cross the border, or are these companies which are going to be abducted and dragged across the border? By which I mean, are we going to see an active M&A market here as people say, hey, to make my agentic stuff work, I actually need a bunch of particular types of action, and some of those actions already dealt with quite comprehensively by ITP vendors. And hey, there's 300 of those. There's got to be some good value for it as an M&A target. Is that, am I imagining something, or is that likely to happen?
Hey, Matt, that was my other prediction for 2025, that we're going to see increased consolidation because of that.
Great. So either I read that and forgot you wrote it as one of the 11, or we just have great minds thinking alike. But it doesn't matter. It's good. It's good that we're all in wild agreement here. Alan, I saw you doing some nodding when Dan was talking about, particularly when we started to get to the edge of supply chain kind of use cases there. Your mic is off.
Flip it. So supply chain being a good example of one of the, it's not the only one, but one of the industry verticals where we know there's an appetite for change. We know there's a need for change. It's massive. It's a massive industry. And IDP, not just IDP vendors, but we're talking about them here, have really dipped their toe occasionally, go, oh, that's too hard. Well, for the ones who are prepared to do the hard work, my goodness me, it's some opportunity. I mean, healthcare, all the back office of healthcare, the list goes on, construction, engineering. There's loads of opportunities. But to Dan's point, because I totally agree with him, my concern is too many of them really are not prepared to put in the work. They're not prepared to put in the work, and they'll do something generic and say, well, we've been doing generic stuff for forever, so we'll just do something with bills of lading. That'll get us through. No, it won't. They're going to have to, I think, they're not going to be acquired. I personally think not all of them, but plenty of them really need to go deep into a vertical. Because if you look at the size of so many of these companies, they're what, 10, 20, 30, $40 million. They could be $100 million by just doing one vertical and pitching this, we can do anything for anybody. But that's whatever. Yeah.
And I guess sizing, just thinking specifically about supply chain, sizing that opportunity or understanding on the supply chain side what the appetite is for IDP's type of technology would be something that, hey, if you were watching us next year, we might have some research coming out about.
In fact, we do, as you know. But what we already know is that there is interest. I mean, there's a lot of interest. I mean, we know that. It's a given. But you can't just sell them a piece of software. You need to sell them a solution to their problem. What is the problem in the warehouse? How is this actually going to fix it? Because that's not going to move the needle. Oh, I can read a document for you. Oh, great. Cheers, mate. What I need to know is stuff going to move off the shelves more quickly? Are we going to have better inventory control? Are we going to have better visibility? Are we going to have fewer disputed invoices? I mean, they've got to sell on the business case, because the technology is not going to move the needle in these untapped industries. Well,
and to Dan's point, some of that technology is already pre-commoditized in the fact that it's available on your desktop. And if you turn on the TV in the UK, they're advertising document summarization for Gemini on mainstream television. So that's a point where I guess you could say that's probably commoditized, where you get it as part of stock Android, to at least to an extent. Okay, well, that's something to look forward to as we get into next year. Now I have to try to face up to kind of my one from last year. So my prediction from 2024 was that generative AI will face its first cold winter. And I actually went back and I actually listened to myself predicting this last year to make sure I could understand the specifics of what I was getting at. Wasn't just that winter was cold and inevitable, because winter is always cold and inevitable, at least it is where I am. It's 3 PM, it's already pitch black outside. But more the fact that the characteristics of the kind of projects that you were going to need to face as an organization in order to get value out of generative AI was going to become apparent to organizations, and that was quite hard. And we were talking 12-18 months ago about how difficult it is to go through that kind of content audit, make sure your security model is right, make sure your permissioning is right, making sure you've got the latest best versions exposed and old ones hidden, and all that stuff from organizations that I listen to, particularly from the SI side, about the projects they're trying to do with those early generative AI desktop tools like Microsoft Copilot, for argument's sake. They've hit all of those barriers, and in fact those barriers have become so well known. They're part of a kind of territorial pissing match between CEOs about who's got the best Copilot. So I would guess that it was a kind of a bit obvious, because we were hearing everybody already talking about it was going to be difficult. I'm going to give myself a double thumbs up for generative AI will face its first cold winter. However, it's probably also faced its only cold winter, as it's been kind of largely subsumed into the agentic stuff that we've all referred to so far, which takes me into my 2025 prediction, which is not there are going to be agents everywhere, because duh. Right, they're already everywhere. This one's a bit more specific, and we've talked a lot over the last year or two about payment models, and it's not because payment models are particularly interesting or exciting, but this, much like the kind of move into SaaS, this gives the opportunity for software companies to have a rethink about how they shake their customers down for cash, right? So there's been a move not just to move into kind of metering, because we're all kind of familiar with metering and consumptive models, but particular type of consumptive models. So my 2025 prediction is the shift to payment on outcome is going to lead to some awkward conversations between customers and suppliers. What I mean by payment on outcome, which is, hey, when you are successful with an agent that we have enabled you to use, you give us $1 or $2 or $5 or an agreed figure. So an agreed outcome, an agreed figure. So it sounds like, hey, you're only paying when you're on the basis of success. Now, interesting, that requires suppliers and customers to agree what success looks like. And I suspect that that's where some of these awkward conversations are going to start. So for argument's sake, if you look at the way in which Salesforce is enabling Service Cloud, which I think the first part of their Agentforce structure to work, they're saying, well, we, Salesforce, believe a successful outcome is a user selecting end conversation in a chat window. And if it happens, we want $2 off of you. Now, it may be that actually is a successful one, or it may be an unsuccessful one, depending whether that's been closed out of frustration or not. But again, it's an interesting jumping off point of a supplier saying, well, we're going to tell you, customer, what your business is, and we're going to tell you what your success factors are, and then we're going to bill you for them. There are other ones involved in that. So like if a window has been open for 24 hours, we're going to assume it's been a successful transaction, so we're going to bill you. Now, I'm not saying this sort of that payment on outcome is going to become the predominant way of doing it. And I'm not saying that those particular ones I've just talked about will be used across all the potential lines of business where we could see agentic. But what it is it's beginning of that sort of conversation between customers and suppliers about, well, if we're paying just on success, are there other parts of our software stack that maybe we could apply that to? Because we don't think we're getting all the value from over here. So it could be a door that's been opened to the kind of billing and contractual discussions that maybe software companies won't be so keen to have either. So I think it's going to be a really interesting trend that's going to play out this year. It might vanish. It might be tried right away and go, you know what, this is too hard to measure, it's too hard to agree, it's too hard to contractually tie down. Or this time next year, we could be talking about lots of exciting discussions we've had. Alan, Dan, I don't know who wants to jump in.
Yeah,
two
things very quick. One, I think one of the challenges here is going to be the sheer unpredictability of billing, right? And that's not something any IT department welcomes. So, oh, it's $30,000. What $30,000? Who did what? What the heck? Or $300,000, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a sheer unpredictability, but it goes back to your thing about success. I've been in this industry a long time now, and I've never come across a technology vendor who doesn't tell me how excited their customers are to be doing this and how successful everybody is. And when you talk to enterprises, it's really a different story.
Yeah.
So this one could be a real bumpy ride because I understand where they're going with it. I understand why they're doing it. And one of the reasons they're doing it is actually using things like, RAG and generative AI and stuff.
Yeah.
It's expensive, right? Yeah. It's expensive. You have to put a cap on this because you could really end up making a loss. But at the same time, this is going to be really tough to roll out.
It's going to be interesting, and just pick out a metric. I didn't really call it out at the time because it felt a bit unfair to call it out at the time. But and as we mentioned, Salesforce in the Dreamforce keynote this year, when Agentforce was being announced, they talked about two metrics. They talked about flows, which is the Salesforce kind of internal system workflow. It's their workflow tool, really, and that runs in the billions every year. Billions, hundreds of billions, I think, of flows run every year. So it's a massive scale of flows. If you look at the number of prompts that run last year, it was like 114,000. So they're way out of scale at this point. So you're starting from a much smaller point, and that was just prompts. That wasn't, it wasn't entire sessions. So that's got a long way to grow. So I think that, we are in that kind of experimental phase. And obviously, Dan, your world has been very much a unit-based economy, a consumption-based economy around IDP. You're processing n number of documents, n number of scans, whatever the metric is. Are you seeing this changing around IDP?
There's a little bit of talk about this, Matt, but I think first of all, we have to give Mark Benioff some credit. He's put this vision out there, and he said that he just hired 1,000 new sales reps, right, to go out and sell his agents. So there are going to be some very awkward conversations happening right now as people sit down to have this. In my world, we don't get paid for success. We get paid for doing the task
Yeah.
that was assigned, which was read the document, extract the data. And that's just it's almost like a utility. It's like you're buying electricity, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the electricity company doesn't guarantee you success, okay? They just provide electricity, and then it's up to you not to burn your house down or to make your TV work or not to short out, the circuits on your new microwave, right? So, you know what I'm saying? I am really, really skeptical about this one. I think it's, here's what I think is going to happen. If somebody like Salesforce actually breaks through and does this and has some large wins and the clients are saying we're never going back, then I think you might see a domino effect happen, because our industry is a bunch of, we follow the herd. Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody's got a great idea, we all run after the herd, right? So I think that's a possibility, but I would give it, maybe a 10% possibility of success, this actually happening, because I can think of so many barriers to success. Like, can you imagine the argument? We didn't succeed. Yes, you did. No, we didn't.
Well, and I think that to a degree, the fact that this first set of use cases they've picked on for these outcomes is being based on Service Cloud, and of course that's an area, particularly with call center and contact center, where there have been long established, understood metrics about the cost of call and the value of call deflection. And I think that's kind of why it's almost like the softest target. We know the cost of a call in your call center and your contact center. We're saying this is be $2. You know whether that's going to save you 25 cents or $25, whatever it is in that variable scale between handling it. So you know the cost absorption you're going to make here. Breaking that out into all the other areas where agents have been suggested they could find a home and finding outcomes there breaks up
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's much more complex.
It's much more complex, and I do think I'm absolutely convinced we're going to see, well, whether anybody will allow us to see, but there's going to be a lot of projects where, a bunch of Salesforce developers or Oracle developers or whatever are going to build out an agent. It's going to be so cool. It's going to be so amazing. It's going to be wonderful, and then they get the bill, and it's like, whoa, I don't think so. So the reality, I mean, what this overlays is the fact that this is really expensive stuff. This technology is not cheap, man.
Yeah, and understanding it, planning for it, and finding the right fit, just as it was in the last cold winter around generative and sort of assistive co-pilots. It's going to be the same kind of issue. Just as the point, first thing that probably report-wise that will come out from us in 2025 actually is a primer on agents, what they are, how you can use them, what it means for your organization, how maybe to plan for them. So that's a little bit of a trailer for that. So I've seen the first copies today. They look pretty good, but it'll be beginning of 2025.
And on new reports, there's I mean, we used to do this as a blog. We've done it, smartened it up, made it into a little report now. By the time this podcast is live, this report should be live. It's basically an M&A roundup of the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And if I say so myself, it is a really interesting read. It's not, well, there is a long list in there, but it's not just a list. And I think it's that's worth a read, and that's a free download.
Awesome. That's wrapped it up quite nicely. And we haven't massively overrun, which, considering how much I was trying to cram into this running order, I'm very pleased about how restrained we've all been from not rambling too long. He says rambling for too long. Anyway, next time it will be 2025, and there'll be 3 more topics and 30 minutes to discuss them. It'll be a regular type of show. I should hopefully be less freaked out by a change in running order that confuses my tiny brain. But anyway, thank you for joining us, Dan.
Thank you, Matt. Glad
thank
to be
you for
here.
joining us again, Alan.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us again, everybody who joined this podcast in today, and for all the other ones in 2024. We really appreciate you coming along and listening to us rambling. Thank you very much. See you soon.